guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited for because I'm here with an 8-book reading wrap up. That's right, for the month of August I was able to complete about 8 books. I definitely had a little bit of higher expectations for myself, but nevertheless I'm still really happy with what I was able to read. I read so many great things, from some new releases from my favorite authors to the final book to my all-time favorite fantasy series. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in. Right off the bat, the first book I'm going to chat about is Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the final book to the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which is the final series within the sequence of the Realm of the Elderlings at this point. There are rumblings that this author is going to continue with a spin-off series, which definitely I would read and eat right up. But for right now, these are all the books that are currently out and planned to be out, and I have to say, this delivered on all fronts. It's really hard to perfectly articulate the journey that I've been on with The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I have a whole reading vlog where I document and explain a lot about this series. If you guys want to watch that, I will have that link down below. But just to kind of give you perspective, this is the 16th book within a series. This is also the 9th book following one specific character, our main character Fitz, who I've literally watched grow up from a young boy into a young man, into a full-grown adult. I've seen him make so many decisions, watch him go on so many different journeys, make enemies, make friends, just over and over again, change the course of his life in so many different directions. The relationship and connection that I have with the Fitz and the Fool trilogy and just the Realm of the Elderlings in general is like indescribable. This is my favorite sequence of books I've ever read. It's one of the most rewarding reading experiences I've ever read. The character journey, just the pacing, the plot payoff, the concepts, the character work, politics, the action, the adventure, everything that occurred over the expanse of the Realm of the Elderlings and also this final trilogy and also this final book, I would change nothing. I feel like the emotional connection I have to this series is just something I'm going to have with me for the rest of my life. And I also see myself rereading these books over and over and over again. There is no character that I feel more drawn to than Fitz, who sort of anchors this entire sequence. And just the amount of things you have gone through together with Fitz and living inside Fitz's head for so long, it's just impossible to not care deeply about the story and characters that you're encountering with Robin Hobb. I love this author's writing style. I love how she makes us wait for things. Payoff that I feel like I've had numerous times with Robin Hobb's plot is truly just one of my favorite experiences. I always feel like she's catching me by surprise. I always feel like she waits to the perfect moment to sort of drop the mic in her stories. And this book was the perfect way to conclude a perfect series, which was the perfect trilogy to end the whole Realm of the Elderlings sequence. I'm rambling. All is to say is I loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm devastated that I finished it, but I'm also so grateful that I finished it because it was a stunning thing to read. I'm still unwell thinking about this, but amazing. Amazing. Don't lie, after I finished Assassin's Fate, I was in a bit of a book hangover. The thought of picking up a new book or series just felt really intense because I just felt like nothing was going to be able to match like the emotional experience I just had. But I did finally decide to pick up The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This was a book that was on my fall TBR, and it's just a novel I have seen now numerous times. It's just like a popular new release. This is a contemporary fantasy series following our main character Cassie, and at the start of this novel, Cassie lives a very normal life. She works in a bookstore in New York City, and then one day one of her favorite customers actually passes away in her store, leaving her a very mysterious and strange book called The Book of Doors. This book allows her to move through any door to travel to any place. Initially, she's really excited about this new power, who wouldn't be, but she also realizes that this book puts her on a radar of some very dangerous people, as there are other people in this world who really want to collect all of these books for different reasons, for power, money, fame, you get the picture, and now Cassie is in great danger. She also runs into this sort of grumpy Scottish librarian, and they begin to work alongside each other. This is a book that I feel like was just okay. I feel like aspects of it were quite enjoyable, but I also feel like a lot of the plot elements I have read before and have also just sort of been better in other books, if that makes sense. The strength of the story is definitely the plot. It has a thriller lean to it, so it is quite a page turner, and there are reveals after reveals after reveals. Some of them land, some of them don't, but a few of them did catch me by surprise and kept me wanting to figure out what was going to happen by the end of the story. I would say the overall weakness of this book are the characters themselves. Every character I sort of came across felt sort of one-dimensional, a little flat. I felt like they were more serving the parts that they were supposed to play within the story, and they weren't really a very tangible experience. I felt this in particular with the main central villain within this story. They were so like mustache twirly and evil, and yet I was never scared while reading their POV chapters like I should have been. They were very disturbing, very dark, very bone-chilling, but it just didn't come across with the level of intensity I feel like the author was trying to create with those scenes. And I would say this sort of one-dimensional feeling was true across all of the characters present in this book, even the main character Cassie. It was engaging, it was fun, it wasn't mind-boggling or even wholly original. At the end of the day, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't fantastic. It was just sort of okay, and I would give it like a 2.75 out of 5 stars. Next up, I decided to pick up a YA fantasy book I was really anticipating, and that is Where the Dark Stands Still. And the synopsis of this book definitely sold me right away. It basically follows our main character Liska, and Liska has been told her entire life that magic is evil, and people who practice magic are also evil. So she has not only been hiding her magic, but she's also been actively trying to get rid of it. At the beginning of this novel, she is getting desperate. So desperate that she travels within the magical wood in hopes of finding this flower that will grant her a wish that she can use to get rid of her magic. And while she does discover this flower, she also runs into an unexpected individual, and that is the demon of this forest, and she is forced to make a bargain with him, which is kind of like living in his cottage for a year and helping him like maintain his property. She's confused but decides to agree, and that's sort of where the story kicks off. I really liked this book. It's been a minute since I've read a YA novel, and I feel like this book really checked a lot of boxes for me. In a phrase, I would sort of describe this book as like Howl's Moving Castle meets Uprooted. The character dynamics were so much fun. Obviously, we have this sort of charismatic, also sort of useless magical demon who's lived isolated within this forest for a very long time. We have our main character, Liska, who's incredibly likable, has a legacy of magic herself, a complicated relationship with her family, and also a complicated relationship with her own magic and self. So a lot of the story is her sort of coming into her own power and beginning to understand the secrets of this magical place and unlocking and accepting her own potential. The story is also rather domestic. It's mostly taking place within this manor, within this magical forest, and there's some other like unexpected magical figures that you meet too. So it has like a semi-cozy element of it, which is why I relate it to Howl's Moving Castle. There's lots of secrets and mysteries to uncover, and I also appreciated the sort of seriousness of the narrative tale overall. The writing style itself was also quite beautiful, and I felt like leaned into the fairy tale slash like folklore inspiration to the book too. I just really enjoyed so many aspects of this book. I found the plot engaging. I really enjoyed the ending too. And overall, I would honestly highly recommend this book, and I gave it like a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was a shorter book, but another home run, and that was Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher. It's no secret that I love T. Kingfisher so much, but still, this was a book I was sort of putting off because while I love T. Kingfisher's writing, I wasn't sure if it was going to be able to translate as well within a novella or short story, and I'm happy to report I was completely wrong. I was enchanted by this. I loved the characters, the writing, the concepts of this was so good. I do not understand how she was able to pack everything she did in the 120 pages that this book sort of covered. This is T. Kingfisher's sort of reimagining and retelling of the tale of Sleeping Beauty, and she sort of puts a fae spin on it. Our main character is a figure named Toadling, and she has been living within a magical forest now for a very long time, and she's sort of the guardian of this forest and of this tower that's also surrounded by like massive vines and thorns that make it obviously very difficult to scale. And she's also in charge of keeping people out of this forest and away from the tower and the monster that lives there. Unfortunately though, there is a myth and tale that a beautiful maiden is sleeping inside, which makes things rather complicated for her. And at the beginning of this book, a knight enters the forest, and that sort of kicks everything off. I was delighted by this. The writing style, Toadling as our narrator and main character, was amazing. The sort of fae strangeness that T. Kingfisher added to this well-known fairy tale worked so well. I was just hooked. I could not put this book down. Completely swept away. I don't understand how she can have such good characterization and believable connection between characters so quickly. It was so charming and funny, but it had a darkness and an edge to it as well, kind of making it lean into that classic darkness that fairy tales tend to have. Honestly, I would give this book 5 out of 5 stars. By far one of my favorite novellas I've read recently, and I just truly Love Tegan Fisher. The next book I picked up was another new YA release. I'm sort of back in my YA reading era. The genre can truly be so much fun, especially if you pick up the right books. And the book is Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. I love Maureen Johnson so much. I personally also just have a huge soft spot for like YA murder mysteries and thrillers. I feel like they can be engaging, dark, heart-pounding, but I also feel like they tend to lean into like being a little bit campy, fun, funny in a way that just creates this perfect mixture of something that is simply so entertaining. And Maureen Johnson in particular has such a talent at doing this. Truly Devious in that series. Delighted by it, still love it. I just simply put will always read a Maureen Johnson book. This is this author's newest release, and it's actually a standalone story, and we're introduced to our main character Marlo. And initially, Marlo's summer was going quite well. She finally convinced the girl of her dreams to go on a date with her, and everything was going swimmingly. Until that is, she accidentally burned down her family friend's cabin, making her kind of known as the fire girl around town. Looking to sort of lay low from this new notorious reputation, Marlo decides to take up an offer to work at a faraway house called the Morning House, which is a very notorious mansion in this nearby small town, and it's basically open for one summer only, and a bunch of teenagers are living there and working there as like tour guides, working at the gift shop. You sort of get the idea. Marlo arrives, and we begin to realize that not only is something really weird with this house, as it does have like this curse and a bunch of deaths happened here at the turn of the century following this really weird family, but also something recently happened in town. In this book, we are following Marlo in present day as she's living and working here, trying to make friends, also kind of finding herself at the center of a mystery. But we also read past chapters of various people who lived at Morning House too, in a way that Maureen Johnson is just so good at. It was so engaging. It was the perfect balance of fun, campy. I love Marlo as a main character so much. I was rooting for her. She's so silly and goofy and charming. I wanted her to get her crush in the end. I wanted her to figure out what was going on, but it was still like eerie and spooky at times too. And I just feel like the balance between light and dark was so good. That coupled with these past chapters and storylines just made the story itself so compelling, because it truly was like a dual mystery kind of playing out, multiple reveals in past and present, and how things sort of connected through time was also great. It was just a very engaging, very fun, very entertaining YA murder mystery story. Maureen Johnson does it again. I love it. Every time, like 4.25 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. And then from there, I decided to read 2 books from one of my favorite authors of all time. The first one was her new release, and that is The Seventh Veil of Salomon by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia so much, and something in particular I really enjoy about this author is that her stories are so diverse. I never know where this author's stories are going to go, what kind of plot she's going to follow, what kind of location, inspiration, genre that she's going to write within. And her just pure versatility in the types of stories that she likes to write, just, I love it so much. And she's honestly just written so many incredible and engaging stories, and I've eaten them all up. And her newest book in particular has to be like one of my favorite releases of hers yet. It's an old Hollywood story that was honestly so captivating from page one. Basically, the book opens in 1950s Hollywood, and a great movie epic is in the process of being made. During this time period, these mega films were quite popular, and this director, who's rather particular, has dreamed of making one film centering the ancient figure of Salomon. Salomon herself was considered a beautiful woman in the ancient past, and she's stuck between a variety of different inputs, a complicated relationship with her mother, a complicated relationship with her uncle. People wanted her for different reasons, for her beauty, for her power. She also had her own interests that she was trying to keep in play, and also her own love and passion. And ultimately, as many ancient tales do, it ends in tragedy. Fast forward again to the 50s, there's now this movie being made about her life, and we also follow 2 actresses that sort of surround this film. First is Vera, who is a beautiful young woman who sort of plucked from obscurity in Mexico, where she worked as a receptionist at her father's dentist's office. Now she finds herself cast as the main character of this film playing Salomon in a movie, not only thrust into the limelight as a young female actress, but also now living in America as a young Mexican woman as well. Alongside Vera, we're also reading POV chapters from a woman named Nancy, who's lived now in Hollywood for a few years and will simply do anything to make it big. This is a story about power dynamics, it's a story about survival, and it's also a book where Silvia Moreno Garcia parallels the stories of all three of these women and how they're all sort of tied together and connected, and it's so fascinating to see how the whole thing sort of plays out. I love, first and foremost, just structurally how this author decided to tell the story, how we sort of seep from one character to the next, and there's a blurriness between this sort of ancient tale and the movie itself that's being filmed. We also begin to see how some of the systems, expectations, people had to move through society in the ancient times of Salomon are still existing for a lot of our characters today in some form or fashion. It's truly just so hypnotic, it's lush, it has lots of drama, and it also just has this sense of like a great tragedy and a great epic as you're reading and watching the story unfold. I was hooked. I was on the edge of my seat. Loved this book. I'd give it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed was Certain Dark Things, also by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And once I begin describing the synopsis of this book, I think you'll be able to get a really good picture by what I mean that all of her books are rather distinct from each other. This is a kind of futuristic vampire novel set in Mexico City. This is also one of her earlier releases, and just right off the bat, I will say I liked this book because I like this author's writing, her concepts, and her plots. I would also say this is probably one of her weaker releases, but still it had some really enjoyable aspects to the plot and story. This is a book that kind of introduces us to our two main characters. The first is Domingo, and he lives on the street sort of scraping by an existence by being something called a trash collector. He really is just trying to keep his head down, stay out of trouble. So obviously when he runs into an Aztec vampire, this was a little bit of an unexpected situation, and her name is Atil. And she's currently on the run from some other individuals who chased her out of her and her family's territory. In this world that Silvia Moreno Garcia created, there are many different types of vampires, which is honestly so cool. I think one of the strengths of this book was definitely the world building and just the concept. We have our main character Atil, who is an Aztec vampire, whose origins can be traced back for thousands of years in this sort of general geographic region. Vampires themselves were found out in this world in the 70s, which resulted a lot of different countries and governments to expel vampires from the local lands, meaning that different vampire types began to appear all around the world as they're trying to find new places where they could exist and survive in. There are lots of different types of vampires that kind of feed and interact with the world differently, but for our main character Atil, she and her family sort of lived in the northern region of Mexico for a long time until another group of vampires moved in and a turf war began to ensue, resulting in her having to flee to Mexico City. But Mexico City is supposed to be a vampire-free area, meaning her moving throughout the city is rather dangerous, not only because she's quite literally being chased, but also the government and the police force are also keeping an eye out for any type of vampire individual, which is where we meet some other characters like Anna in this book, who is a detective. We also read from perspectives of people who are chasing Atil and Domingo, and overall, I would just describe this book as a very interesting, fast-paced, vampire-centric, kind of like detective thriller sort of situation. Going into this book, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but aspects of it definitely pleasantly surprised me. Characters themselves in this series, I honestly really appreciated because they're rather nuanced. There are likable characters, but they're also rather flawed, which I felt like made for a really unique reading experience. Atil and Domingo are very unique, and their relationship that they sort of formed throughout this book also very unique. Domingo himself is not only such a funny character to center in the story, but I really appreciated that the author really centered a figure that typically has very limited power in this society amongst people who have much more influence and power generally, and the sort of contrast of that situation was interesting to play out. There is lots of twists and turns in the story, and in general, I was pretty entertained from beginning to end. I wouldn't say this book was perfect. Some of the pacing was a little bit slow. I wouldn't say the whole plot was like fully realized. It had really strong concepts, really strong world building, such a cool idea. I feel like this could be like such a cool television show. It just wasn't like a perfect novel or just as strong of a novel that I feel like we typically get from this author. But again, this is one of her earlier releases, and I'm still so happy I picked it up because I still liked it, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of this author. It's worth checking out. Overall, I would give it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The very last book I'm going to show off is a book that I actually DNF'd mid-month, and that is the Howling Dark Dark by Christopher Ruccio. This is the second book to the Empire of Silence series, which is like an epic, super popular space opera series. It follows our main character Hadrian, who's sort of this notorious figure in the galaxy. Some laud him as a hero, some view him as the greatest villain of all time, and he is now recounting his life and his story to us, the reader. And it's kind of up to us to draw our own conclusions, if you will. I read the first book a few months ago and I liked it. I found aspects of the world building, the character work to be pretty interesting. Some of the plotting was a bit choppy for me, but I had heard really good things going into book 2, so I thought, you know, let's continue it and give it a try. Here's the thing about book 2 and why I sort of DNF'd it. Because honestly, I do feel like it's a combination of a couple of things. I feel like one, my brain just wasn't really in the headspace for something that had such an intricate plot with lots of characters, like lots of different threads I had to follow. Concentrating while reading this book just was not really working out for me, and I just found myself kind of like zoning out and having to reread stuff over and over again. Granted, I feel like most of that was on me, but I do feel like some of that kind of has to be on the plot writing of this book. Sometimes I feel like this author can be a little verbose and a little circular with how they go about describing stuff that just kind of makes it a little wordy and lengthy, if you will. Plot-wise, I do actually feel like there was some strengths in this second installment. There was a bit of a time skip, and I do feel like there was kind of a more cohesive plot sequence from what I've read so far within this book, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that is going to play out throughout the rest of the story. The beginning of this book, super confusing. There was kind of a poorly handled time skip, but I do feel like the book begins to get its sea legs about 100 pages in. All that to say is I've read about 275 pages of a 650-page book, so I have a lot left of this book to read. This was a situation where I decided to DNF a book that I was liking, but just didn't feel like the right time to be reading it, and I was sort of forcing myself to read something that I was enjoying. Just wasn't in the headspace for it, you know what I mean? Alrighty guys, that is my 8-book reading wrap-up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!